There are moments in life when silence becomes heavier than words. Moments when keeping quiet feels like carrying stones in your chest, one after another, until you can barely breathe. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, when my stepbrother stood in my kitchen, smiled at me the way he always did, and said something that made my entire world stop spinning. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, holding a dish towel in my hands, feeling something inside me crack open after years of being held together by hope and denial. That was the day I realized that protecting someone else's comfort had cost me my own peace. And that was the day I decided, finally, to speak. My name is Sarah. I'm 42 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, where people wave from their porches and ask about your day at the grocery store. It's the kind of place where secrets feel impossible to keep. Yet somehow I kept mine for almost 30 years. This is not a story about anger or revenge. This is a story about what happens when you stay silent for too long, about what it costs you, and about the small, terrifying act of finally telling the truth. I never imagined I would be the kind of person who needed to break her silence. I thought I was strong. I thought I had moved on. But the truth is, some wounds don't heal just because you ignore them. They wait. They sit quietly inside you, shaping the way you see yourself, the way you move through the world. And one day, when you least expect it, they demand to be seen. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the day everything fell apart, but to the years before when things were simpler. Or at least, when I believed they were. I was 9 years old when my mother remarried. My father had passed away 2 years earlier from a sudden heart attack, and my mother, bless her heart, did her best to hold our little family together. It was just the two of us for a while. She worked long hours as a nurse, and I learned to be independent early. I made my own lunches, did my homework at the kitchen table, and waited for her to come home each night so we could have dinner together. Those years were hard, but they were ours. Then she met Richard. He was kind, soft-spoken, and patient with me in a way that made my mother's eyes light up. I remember the first time he came to our house for dinner. He brought flowers for my mom and a book for me, an illustrated copy of fairy tales that I still have on my shelf today. He didn't try too hard to win me over, and I appreciated that. He just let things happen naturally. Within a year, they were married. Richard had a son from his previous marriage. His name was Daniel. He was 12 when we became a family, 3 years older than me, and from the very first day, he made it clear that he wasn't happy about the new arrangement. He was polite enough in front of our parents, but when it was just the two of us, he was cold, distant. He would walk past me in the hallway without a word, leave the room when I entered, and barely acknowledge my presence at the dinner table. I didn't blame him. I understood, even as a child, that he was grieving too. His parents had divorced badly, and now his father had a new wife and a new daughter. I imagined it must have felt like a betrayal. And now his father had a new wife and a new daughter. I imagined it must have felt like a betrayal. So I gave him space. I stayed out of his way. I tried to be the kind of sister who didn't make things harder. Our parents tried to blend us together. Family movie nights, weekend trips to the lake, birthday parties where we were expected to smile for photos. And we did. We played our parts. To the outside world, we were a happy, blended family. But inside the house, when the cameras were off, Daniel and I existed in separate worlds.
I was 13 when things started to change in a way I didn't understand.
Daniel grew taller.
Daniel began paying attention
He started
to me.
high school and
not in
became
a kind
popular.
way,
He
but in a
played
way that
football,
made my
had lots
skin
of
feel
friends,
strange.
and girls called
He
the
would
house
stand too
asking
close
for
when
him.
we were alone.
My mother
He would
adored
make
him.
comments about
Richard
how I looked,
adored
how
him.
I dressed.
He was charming.
At
when
first,
he
I
wanted
thought
to
maybe
be.
he was just
the kind
teasing,
of boy
the way
who would
older
make
brothers
adults
do.
laugh
But
and
it didn't
feel
feel
at
like
ease.
teasing.
I watched
It
from
felt
the
like something
sidelines,
else,
quiet and unnoticed.
something that made me
The
want to
shy girl who
disappear.
preferred books
I
to
didn't tell
parties.
anyone. I didn't know how. What would I even say? That my stepbrother made me uncomfortable? That I didn't like the way he looked at me? It felt too small, too vague, and I was afraid no one would believe me. Or worse, that they would believe me and it would tear our family apart. My mother was so happy. Richard was so kind. I couldn't be the one to ruin that. So I stayed quiet. I learned to avoid being alone with Daniel. I started spending more time in my room, at the library, at friends' houses. I became invisible, and for a while that worked. Rising conflict high school came and went. Daniel graduated and moved to a nearby city for college. I felt like I could finally breathe. The house felt lighter without him in it. I focused on my studies, made a small group of close friends, and started to dream about my own future. I wanted to be a teacher. I loved the idea of helping kids feel seen and safe, the way I had wished someone had seen me. But Daniel came home for holidays, for birthdays, for summer breaks. And every time he walked through the front door, that old feeling came back. The tightness in my chest. The need to make myself small. He was still charming. Still adored by everyone. And I was still the quiet one. The one nobody really noticed. There was one night, the summer before I started college, that I will never forget. Our parents had gone out to dinner with friends. Daniel and I were home alone. I was in the living room, reading. He came in and sat across from me. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with this look I couldn't read. Then he started talking. He said things that made my stomach turn. Personal things. Inappropriate things. He said them casually. Like it was a joke, like I should laugh along. I didn't laugh. I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, gripping my book, praying for him to stop. And eventually he did. He stood up, smiled, and walked out of the room like nothing had happened. I went to my room and locked the door. I sat on the floor and cried quietly, because I didn't want anyone to hear. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to be dramatic. That word, dramatic, had been used against girls like me my whole life. So I swallowed it down. I buried it. I told myself it was just words, that it didn't mean anything. That I was overreacting. But I wasn't overreacting. I know that now. I knew it then, deep down, even if I couldn't admit it. College gave me distance. I moved 3 hours away, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I made new friends. I dated. I laughed without looking over my shoulder. I built a life that was mine. I saw my family on holidays, and I was polite to Daniel, but I kept my distance. I thought that was enough. I thought I had handled it. Then, when I was 25, I met my husband James. He was kind and steady, the sort of man who made me feel safe. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Daniel was there, of course. He stood in the family photos, smiling. He gave a toast at the reception that made everyone laugh. And I stood beside my new husband, smiling too, pretending everything was fine. James and I built a good life together. We bought a little house with a backyard. I became a teacher, just like I dreamed. We talked about having kids someday. Life was quiet and steady, and I was grateful for that. But Daniel was still part of the family. He came to dinners. He showed up at birthdays. He called my mother every week and sent her flowers on Mother's Day. He was the golden child. The one everyone was proud of. And I was still the quiet one. The one who kept her head down and didn't make waves. There were moments, over the years, when I thought about saying something. When I thought about pulling my mother aside and telling her the truth. But every time I came close, I talked myself out of it. What good would it do now? It was so long ago. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I remembered. Maybe I was being unfair. But deep down, I knew what had happened. I knew how it had made me feel. And I knew that pretending it didn't happen was slowly eating away at me. The breaking point came on an ordinary day. There was nothing special about it. No warning. No build-up. Just a normal Tuesday in late September. James was at work. I had the day off from school. I was home, cleaning the kitchen, listening to music, thinking about what to make for dinner. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was Daniel. He was holding a box of pastries from the bakery downtown, smiling that same smile I'd seen 1,000 times. He said he was in the neighborhood and thought he'd stop by to say hello. My first instinct was to tell him I was busy, to politely send him away. But I didn't, because that's what I always did. I stayed polite. I stayed quiet. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. He talked about work, about a trip he was planning, about our parents. I listened and nodded, the way I always did. I made coffee. I offered him a pastry. I played the role I had been playing for decades. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that made my blood run cold. He said he'd been thinking about me lately. About when we were younger. He said he remembered those times. The things he used to say to me, the way I used to react. And then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an apologetic laugh. A laugh that said he found it funny. That he thought it was all just harmless fun. I felt my hands start to shake. I set my coffee cup down carefully, afraid I might drop it. He kept talking. He said he hoped I wasn't still upset about all that. That it was just kid stuff. That we were family now, and families move past things. Kid stuff. That phrase echoed in my mind. Kid stuff. As if the years of discomfort, the fear, the shame, the nights I cried alone in my room were just harmless games. As if my pain didn't matter. I looked at him sitting there in my kitchen, so comfortable, so sure of himself, and something inside me snapped. Not with anger. Not with rage. Just with clarity. I realized, in that moment, that he had never once considered how I felt. Not back then, and not now. To him, I was just part of the backdrop of his life. Someone who didn't matter enough to hurt. And worse, he expected me to agree with him. To laugh it off. To let it go. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I took a breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet but steady. I said, "It wasn't kid stuff, Daniel." He stopped mid-sentence. He looked at me, confused, as if he didn't understand. I continued. "What you said to me, what you did, it wasn't harmless. It hurt me. It scared me. What you did, it wasn't harmless. It hurt me. It scared me. And I've carried that with me for almost 30 years. The kitchen went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Daniel's expression shifted. The smile faded. He looked uncomfortable, maybe even annoyed. He tried to brush it off. He said I was being too sensitive, that I was remembering it wrong, that he was just a kid back then and didn't know any better. But I didn't back down. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't try to make him feel better. I said, "You knew. Maybe you didn't understand the full weight of it." I said, "You knew. Maybe you didn't understand the full weight of it, but you knew it made me uncomfortable, and you kept doing it anyway." He stood up. He said he didn't come here to be attacked, that he thought we were past all this. He said I was trying to ruin his relationship with the family. I stayed seated. I looked him in the eyes, and I said, "I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm just telling you the truth, and you don't get to decide that it didn't matter." He left. He grabbed his jacket, walked out the door, and didn't look back. I sat there in my kitchen, alone, shaking. Not from fear, not from anger, but from the sheer weight of what I had just done. I had spoken. Resolution. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Daniel didn't call. He didn't text. But my mother did. She called me the next evening, her voice tight and confused. She asked me what had happened. She said Daniel had told her we'd had a disagreement, but he didn't go into details. She wanted to know if everything was okay. I could hear the worry in her voice, the fear that her family was fracturing. And for a moment, I almost backed down. I almost said it was nothing, that we just had a misunderstanding, that everything was fine. But I couldn't. Not this time. I told her the truth. Not all of it, not right away, but enough. I told her that Daniel had said and done things when we were younger that had hurt me, that I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, but that I couldn't do it anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my mother said softly, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice broke my heart, because I heard the pain in it. Her voice broke my heart, because I heard the pain in it, the guilt, the realization that something had been happening under her roof and she hadn't seen it. I said, "I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to ruin everything." She started to cry. She said she was sorry, that she wished she had known, that she wished she had protected me better. I cried too. We both did. And for the first time in years, I felt like my mother really saw me. The conversation with Richard was harder. He was defensive at first, protective of his son. He said that Daniel was a good person, that he'd made mistakes, but that everyone deserves forgiveness. I didn't argue. I just said that forgiveness doesn't erase harm, and that I needed him to hear me, not defend Daniel. Not defend Daniel. It took time. Weeks. Months. There were difficult family dinners. Tense phone calls. Moments when I wondered if speaking up had been worth it. But slowly, things began to shift. My mother started asking me questions. Real questions. About how I had felt growing up. About what I needed now. She stopped trying to fix things and just listened. Richard, too, eventually came around. He apologized for not taking me seriously at first. He said he had always seen me as strong, and he hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying. Daniel and I didn't reconcile. Not in the way people might hope. We didn't have a tearful conversation where he apologized and I forgave him. He sent me a text weeks later saying he was sorry if he had hurt me. He sent me a text weeks later saying he was sorry if he had hurt me. The word "if" stung, but I didn't respond. I didn't owe him anything. What mattered was that I had spoken, that I had chosen myself, that I had stopped protecting his comfort at the expense of my own peace. James held me through all of it. He listened without judgment. He reminded me, on the days I doubted myself, that I had done nothing wrong. That silence is not the same as peace. That truth, even when it's painful, is worth speaking. Months passed. The tension in the family eased, though it never fully went away. Daniel stopped coming to every family gathering. When he did come, we were polite but distant. And I was okay with that. Because I wasn't carrying his shame anymore. I wasn't getting the weight of his actions or the burden of keeping everyone comfortable. I had set it down. And for the first time in decades, I felt light. It's been 2 years since that Tuesday in September. 2 years since I spoke the truth I had been hiding for most of my life. I won't tell you that everything is perfect now. Healing isn't linear. There are still days when I feel the old familiar tug of guilt, the voice that whispers I should have stayed quiet. But those days are fewer now, and I've learned to quiet that voice with the truth. I deserve to be heard. I deserve to take up space. I deserve to live without carrying someone else's shame. My relationship with my mother is stronger now. We talk more openly. She tells me she's proud of me, not just for being a good daughter, but for being brave. That word used to scare me. Brave. I never felt brave. But maybe bravery isn't the absence of fear. Maybe it's speaking even when your voice shakes. I still teach. I still love my students. And now when I see a quiet child in the back of the classroom, the one who doesn't speak up, the one who keeps their head down, I make sure they know they are seen. I make sure they know their voice matters. Because silence doesn't protect you. It buries you. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Your truth matters. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it disrupts the peace. Even if people don't want to hear it. You are not responsible for protecting those who hurt you. You are not responsible for keeping everyone else comfortable. Your voice is yours, and it deserves to be heard. I found mine on a Tuesday afternoon standing in my kitchen with shaking hands and a pounding heart. And though it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, it was also the most freeing. I hope, if you're carrying silence that's too heavy, you find your moment too, when you're ready, in your own time. And I hope, when you speak, you feel the same lightness I felt, because you deserve it. We all do. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I hope it gave you courage. Or at least, I hope it reminded you that you're not alone. We all carry something, but we don't have to carry it forever. Take care of yourself. Speak your truth. And know that your voice, your story, your pain, it all matters. Always.